Hey there, NextGenTakus here. In this video, we're going to go over a Python script that I recently open sourced that will let you pick random comments from a specific YouTube video. This is something that you can do for creating giveaway contests and things like that. But the takeaway from this video maybe won't be necessarily using this script for that exact use case for you, but maybe once we start going over the Python code, maybe there'll be a takeaway or two or a tip that you might be able to apply back to your own scripts. So the reason I even developed this script was the other week I created this video here for my 10K subscriber giveaway. And to enter this contest here to win either a Flask or Docker course, all you had to do was comment on the video. And I don't know if it's like this for you, but me as a software developer, I am very, very, very lazy, and I don't like doing tedious things like having to scroll through this entire video's worth of like 100 comments and then copy paste every single username into a text file and then maybe chain together or pipe together a couple of Unix commands to just pick a couple of winners from that list, right? That whole entire process may take, I don't know, 15 or 20 minutes, right? Put on some good music and just crank it out and you're done. But no. That's too boring. Instead, I spent about an hour writing this Python script that uses YouTube's API and automates the entire process. And at the end of the day, when you run this command with certain arguments here, which we're going to go over, then you get this report here that we're looking at. Basically, you can just pop in a specific YouTube ID, put in a list of users that you don't want to win for various reasons. For example, I wanted to omit myself, and Warren over here, he just wanted to drop in a nice comment, but he wasn't interested in winning the prize. So, you can basically pass in like a comma-separated list. And there's other arguments you can put here as well, like you can choose the number of winners, like for example, it defaults to 10. But like long story short, you run this command and this is what you get here, right? The output of 10 random winners in this case, and we can see like how many top-level comments were returned, and there's some, dedupe action going on here, right? So if someone comments 5 times, then they're only going to be eligible to win once, right? They're not like increasing their chances of winning by commenting multiple times. And then, yeah, that's basically how this thing works. And in this video, we're going to go over setting things up to get this to work, as well as go over the Python script to implement all of this. And I think before we get into the Python code, it's probably going to make sense to actually run this command a bit, maybe get it up and running on your machine. We're also going to go over things like how to create a YouTube API key. So if that's useful to you, then we'll figure that out as we go, although that's coming up pretty soon here. So this Python script ends up being 0 dependencies, other than just needing Python 3.6. because we are using f-strings. So, there's no package up on PyPy to install it. All you have to do is just take this curl command here and paste it into a terminal to get it installed. And, that's going to just copy it over into your user local bin path here, and then you can just run it. So if we run which pick random here, we can see there it is available on user local bin. If we go, we can just run like the help menu here, and we are all set and good to go. Cool. So now that the script is installed, we do need to do one other thing here, which is create a YouTube API key. And this is all in the documentation here under installation. So, in order to access YouTube's API, that's what this key is going to be for. So it's free. It takes about a minute to set up. It's not too bad. So let's do that together here by following these couple of steps. So step number 1, we need to go to this console developers.google.com. So I'm going to open that up here in a new browser window. And I already do have a key created here because while I was developing the script, I needed a key, but let's create a new credential together, or a new API key specifically, just so we're all on the same page here. So you can just go to create credentials, and then we're going to create an API key. There's other types that you can create here, but those don't apply to our project. Then from here, we could choose to copy our API key to the clipboard just by clicking that, but let's not do that right now because we are going to be copying something else to our clipboard pretty soon. But it does give us this really nice warning here that says, hey, we should probably restrict our key a bit instead of, anyone being able to use it if they happen to know this key. So let's go to restrict key here. And this also gives us the opportunity to do things like renaming this to be something else. So I'm going to go with like YouTube 2 or whatever because I already have one named YouTube. Feel free to choose whatever name that you'd like. You can always change it later. It's just, it's just here for basically labeling purposes. So as for these restrictions, we do have a couple of options. We can do a restriction based on a specific website. Like for example, you can only be able to access this key from example.com and nowhere else. That would be kind of interesting, if you had a specific site that you're using this key on. But for us, I think the best bet would be to restrict it by IP address. Now, if you're on consumer grade cable or DSL, that's what I'm on, by the way, chances are your IP address is not really in your control, right? You probably don't have a static IP address that's going to be the same forever. Chances are it's going to be changing once in a while, maybe every couple of months. It really depends on your ISP. But still, for a script like this, where we're just screwing around on the command line, how often are you really going to use this specific script? Probably not that often, a couple times a year. I do like the idea of just restricting it to my specific IP address. This way, if someone did know this exact key here, then they wouldn't be able to access it because they don't have my IP address. So let's go here and just add an item, which is going to add our public IP address here as a restriction. And by the way, I'm not sure if you know this one, but if you do curl ifconfig.me, that is going to output your public IP address. And then you can just copy it to your clipboard, jump back over here, paste it in, and that's why we didn't paste or copy the key before, right? We need to copy paste our IP address. And then we are all good to go there. And then as for these restrictions, we don't need to worry about that. That is just basically restricting it based on like what API endpoints you're allowed to access. We'll just leave that one as the default. And then let's save it here. Although it did say something about 5 minutes before our key is ready. I don't know if that's based on just the restrictions for, specific API endpoints or the whole entire key. I never really had to wait the 5 minutes. It was good to go pretty much immediately. But here we go, right? We have our key. So let's copy this key to our clipboard. And then let's go back to the documentation here for this script. And we just completed the first 2 steps here, right? We went here, we created our API key, but now in order to run this script, and I did this on purpose, right? This script is open source on GitHub, but I didn't hard code my API key into the script. Instead, it's going to expect that we just export this one environment variable like YouTube API key. Technically, I could have chosen a different name, but this is pretty descriptive, but it will need to be this name because this is what the script looks for. So let's jump back over to our terminal here, and we'll just do export YouTube API key, and then we can just paste in the key. And now our terminal is all ready to go. Although keep in mind, like if you were to run this later on, like let's say you reboot your machine or close your terminal and open a new one and you're not using tmux or whatever, then you will need to reset this environment variable. You don't need to make a new key, but you will need to, export the YouTube key, blah, 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 blah. Cool. So now let's go back to the README file here. And it says now, now you can run this tool from the same terminal, like we are good to go. And this, leads us into basically how this tool works, like what parameters are optional, which ones do we need to set. And, I kind of don't like just talking. We should probably just see this thing work. So let's just take a shortcut here and copy paste this one command here from the README file. And this is going to look at that 10K giveaway video that I had, and then it is going to generate this output that we see here. So in this case, I'm omitting myself and Warren, and it's going to use the default 10 winners here. And we can see all the output, right? It's going to be slightly different output than the README file because every time we run this, we're going to get a different set of winners because it's choosing them randomly, right? Out of the 82 comment authors, this is a random set of 10 winners. And if we wanted to customize the number of winners, we could just do -- winners. And then let's say we just wanted to have 2 winners, right? We can do that. And now it's going to pick 2. Or we can do, 25,503 winners. And the script is smart enough to know that, hey man, that number of winners that you have here, 25,000, that's way bigger than the 82. So it's just gonna basically take the 82 as the number of winners. Essentially, everyone is a winner at that point. And also I did put in some error control here too. Like if you try to put in like -5 winners, then it's gonna be like, no, the right winners needs to be a positive integer. Although in this case, it will accept 0 as a winner instead of like me choosing to have 1, only because why not, right? Maybe you just want to see the output here for whatever reasons. Now, there is another option here that we didn't go over, which is verbose mode. So let's say that we want to have 10 winners, right? Technically, we can remove that flag because that's the default. If we run verbose mode, then what that does is, while it paginates through all the results, and we'll get to that once we start looking at the code, it will just output every username here. I was using this while I was developing the script just to make sure, the worst thing you can do as someone who's running a contest, I don't want to bug in the script to accidentally not get everyone on the list, right? So while I was doing this, I just, kept an eye out on this output to make sure it didn't look like too little or there's duplicates or, things like that. So yeah, that is basic usage of the script. So now let's take a look here at the code. And it's just one single file, right? If you wanted to clone this repo on your machine to take a look, feel free to do so. But in this case, you can just sit back and take a look. So if I jump to the bottom here, it's about a 200-line Python script. It's just using various things from Python's standard library. There's no external dependencies, which is kind of nice, right? For these standalone scripts, you don't need to, pip install a whole bunch of stuff to get it up and working. That's one of the main reasons why I like using Python as a general scripting language. That, and it's primarily available on pretty much every distro, right? If you install, Ubuntu, Debian, Mac OS, it's just there, available. You don't need to install anything special. And, in the case of using Windows, you have WSL2. So essentially you're running Linux there. So at the very bottom of this file is like the entry point to the script. When you run the script, then this is what executes, right? This double under main pattern is pretty standard in the Python community. So, when I'm looking at some code or, someone else's project or whatever, I kind of like looking at the entry point first because it lets us know like, okay, this is the code that is going to be running. And, we can see there are a number of function calls here to certain functions that I created. But if we take a general look at, the high level overview of what's going on here, it's like, okay, cool. We're parsing some arguments. Then we're assigning a whole bunch of variables, like manipulating the list, like flattening it, making it unique, removing authors if needed, getting some counts for stuff. Okay, cool, we're picking winners. And then we're generating a report. So yeah, I guess a general takeaway, how I developed this was, as I was writing the code, once I got a decent amount of code written, I just kept refactoring these things out to separate functions because I didn't want this this section of the code just to be riddled with a million conditions. And, I don't want to have to spend 2 hours going through every line of code just to figure out what the heck does a script do. So yeah, that's why I abstracted things out into hopefully well-named functions so we can kind of get a big picture. So now let's start tearing through some of these functions here to see how things work. So when it comes to parsing the args here, I am using argparse, which is a built-in library from Python. It's in the standard library. And I've done a video about this one in the past. I went into the gory details about all the stuff here, like description helps and what is metavar and all this stuff. I kind of don't want to do that again in this video, but I will go over, high level stuff, right? So it's here's how you can define a couple of arguments. You can just name them, whatever you want, as long as, they adhere to Python specific syntax that's allowed. But in this case, we have, the video ID, and then we have a couple of flags here, like the winners, a list of omit authors and verbose here. And in the case of the video ID, there is no default at all. So when we go back, let me just jump over here and run pick. We're going to look at the help menu here. And this help menu, by the way, gets automatically generated by argparse based on the code that we just looked at here. We can see too, right, we get this little description here. That's quite nice. That gets output over here. But we can see when, the usage guide for pick random YouTube comments, things that we see in brackets are optional arguments, and things that aren't in brackets, such as this video ID here, that is a required argument. And we can also see here too, that's a positional argument, the video ID. And then we have the optional ones over here, and we get a little bit of a description about each one of them, which is quite nice, right? For the video ID, that is going to be the 11 characters after the v equals in a YouTube URL. So for example, if I jump back over here and we take a look at the URL up top, then, this is standard youtube.com/watch, right? That's their endpoint to watch a video. And then, well, we have a query string parameter here, right? Where we have v equals, and then we have these 11 characters, like this KYL5, et cetera, et cetera. If you went to any YouTube video, then that video is going to have its own independent ID here, right? This is the video ID. So that's the thing that you'll want to copy. So if we go back to our terminal here, we need to supply that. So once we have that supplied, then we can choose to customize things, right? Based on what we screwed around with before. So now going back to the code here, that is basically the TLDR story on parsing arguments. I really like using argparse because if you're creating something like a zero dependency Python script, the API to set all this stuff up is not that bad, right? We can see, for example, I do have custom types here on the video ID, winners, omit authors. So one cool thing about argparse is you sort of get validation, not built in, but depending on what you're doing, it could be built in. Like this ID here, right? If this were just a normal string, I could have put like str in there, and then the type would have been string, and argparse, would know what to do with that because a string is a built-in type for Python. But in this case, I did write a custom function called check YouTube video ID, and if I jump up to here, then this function, and I went over this in previous videos about argparse, basically the long story short on this one is you can basically create your custom like validations, right? And this custom validation is a little bit naive, right? I'm sure to generate a valid YouTube ID, there's probably some rules where it needs to be like, A through Z, uppercase, lowercase, 0 through N, maybe underscores, I'm pretty sure I've seen in there, possibly hyphens or dashes as well, but probably not exclamation points, right? There's probably a whole like crazy regular expression that would be valid. But in this case, all I did was just make sure that it's 11 characters long, right? If the string's length is 11, then just return that, we are good to go. Otherwise, let's just blow up here by raising this exception here, like argparse argument type error, and then, not a valid YouTube ID. So if I jump over here and we just put in like, I don't know, like 1, 2, 3 or something, then that is going to be like, hey, that's not a valid YouTube ID or video ID. And I think that's pretty good enough. Like that's good enough just for general protection against maybe putting in the wrong thing, right? Like if you accidentally grabbed like all of that, like the v equals and all that stuff, it's going to end up being more than 11 characters. Or if you grab the whole URL, then that's also going to be more than 11 characters as well. So yeah, it's just a protection mechanism against like copy paste errors or something like that. So going back to the code here, we can also see that there is another check here for positive integer. If I jump back down to the next one here, which is picking the winners, then I don't want to just check to make sure it's an int, right? I want to make sure that it's a positive int. So going back here, all I do is I just try to convert this value into an integer. And then if the integer is greater or equal to 0, it is all good. Otherwise, we must say, it needs to be a positive int. So if I go back to here, let me see. Let me go back to the README file here, just so I can copy this ID very quickly. There we go. Back to the terminal. And pop that in. And yeah, so what I was saying before about, what am I doing? Yes, winners. So, if you put the -3 then it's not a positive int. Also, if you try to put in something that's not an integer, it's just going to blow up and just say that it's invalid, which is good enough for me. Again, at some point you need to draw the line between like how specific should your error messages be. And for a script like this, I think that's totally fine. And yeah, if we jump back down to over here, then for the omit authors, I also have a custom type there that checks the omit authors, where basically all I do here is if the author list is like an empty string, then it's going to return an empty list. Otherwise, we return this. And before we get into an explanation of that, let me just go back to the command line here. And if I go to, doing this with nothing, well, notice now that it says I need to export my YouTube API key. It's actually quite nice that this came about because I actually did that exporting in this terminal, not this one. So let me just copy this here. You can just copy that. And then I need to go back and get my API key, which I'll just pop in there and then bring it in. And there we go. And now if, I try to run this default arguments, we're going to get our 10 winners. And what were we looking at before? Yes, the omit list. So if I go to here and I do omit authors and I just put in like an empty list, that's going to give us basically the same thing as doing no flag at all, right? Because if we take a look here at the default for this one, it is an empty string. And again, you can just run like ABC like this. Like this is what I mean by like a comma separated list, right? And in this case, it's going to report that 3 authors were explicitly omit. It's not going to like double check to make sure these authors exist. Basically the implementation for this, and we'll get to that soon enough. It just looks at, it splits. Well, let's go to the code and actually look at it. So here we go. The validation for this one is kind of interesting. So yeah, when it's an empty list, or an empty string, we return the empty list. Otherwise, we do all this stuff. And what this is doing is it's taking in that list of authors that you put from the command line, right? Like A, B, C, and it's just going to split them on a comma, but that's not quite good enough. Like maybe totally technically could have had that work. But we want to add some extra protection in there because, and this will be a good example here. Let me go and clear this and put in something like Nick Janatakis and who was the other one? Warren. Let me just go back to the README file just so I have it here. Okay, there we go. Cool. And go back to here, cancel that, and paste it in. So if I do this, right, we can see that we're ignoring myself and Warren. But it's super easy to like maybe just do this by accident, or just write it like this with basically a space, right? So if I do this, the code works exactly the same. I wanted to basically trim every single leading space and trailing space from every single author in this list. Because, I don't want to make like a syntax error or, an accidental space, like not accidentally omit someone. So in the code here, I am using the built-in map function. And I don't know if you've ever worked with map before. It's one of those things where you basically pass in a list and it returns a list, but it does something to the list. And that something is whatever you want to do. So in this case, I've got this authors here, right, comma, separated string. So I split that into a list by the comma, right, because we want it to be comma delimited. And then we want to do something to that list. And the do something in this case is we just want to run strip. So, and I guess maybe I can open up a Python interpreter for this one. It might be a little bit easier to see this one. But let's just say I have a variable like this, right, hello world. And we do hello dot strip here. And, we get back hello world, right? But if I put, I don't know, 2 spaces in the front and like a whole bunch of spaces in the back here, and we rerun this here, then notice the quotes, right? It completely stripped out all the leading and trailing spaces. And that's exactly what we want. So this code here basically just says, and notice here, I'm not running strip with parentheses, right? This is going to expect us to pass in a function to run, not literally running the function. So what map is going to do is it's going to take every item in the list, iterate over them, and run this function against each, like basically if you did like a 4 item in items or whatever. That's just a shorthand way of just, manipulating a list of stuff. And then finally, we just convert this to a list because the result of map, I guess technically in Python's case, I think the exact type it returns is map or something. So we just explicitly convert it to list. And there we go. So now we have our trimmed list of authors when they're defined, right? If there's an empty string, then it's just an empty list. Why bother doing all that stuff? Cool. So that is how that works. And then for verbose here, there's some options here. It's basically just a flag that you can choose to put in. If it's there, we get verbose mode, and we'll go over the details of that. But yeah, going back down to here, like that's parsing all the arguments. And now let's just jump to like, I guess the very end, right? Generate report. So if I jump over to here, this is another function that just takes a whole bunch of different parameters, right? Like who won and various counts of different things. And then I just use f strings basically to create a really nice output. Well, I think it's really nice, but to be determined by other people. But yeah, I mean, we just, if I go back to here, like this is the output that we're talking about here, right? This whole entire thing is generated from this f string where we just take, the authors count, the duplicate authors count, the omit authors count, like the authors final count, and then we just have that winners count as well as all the winners. And for the winners themselves, that list of winners, I don't want to like output that as like literally a list, right? So I'm almost doing the opposite of split here, which is join. So join lets you take a list, in which case winners is a list, and we'll get to that in a second, like how this winners gets defined. But yeah, we have a list of winners, and we're joining them on a new line with 2 spaces. So if we go back to the output here, then that's what we get here. So we're taking this whole list of, all these names here were a Python list, and now it's one string where each one has 2 spaces before it. And I like this 2-space pattern because if you remember with the verbose mode there, all the usernames get output with 2 spaces. So it's kind of neat, like when you're developing command line tools, you should always try to think like, well, the user should have full control of what they want to do with this data. And like, let's say that you run the script and, it's nice to see all this output, but maybe you want to take just the winners, like the output of who won, nothing else, like all this stuff would be ignored. And then maybe pipe it into another program to do, I don't know, like whatever you need to do. So in this case, like this spacing comma, not only does it look good visually, like it gives you some indentation of like who won, but you can also just like grep out the specific usernames just by looking for lines that start with 2 spaces and then followed by any number of characters. So that's just an easy way to like pipe that out to something else. And I guess technically maybe I can show that here. I didn't really prepare any of this, so I love doing live grep here. So we're going to take the output of that command, pipe it into grep. We're going to look for lines that start with 2 lines or 2 spaces followed by anything. And technically, that should list out. Let me also kill out verbose just so we have like 10 users being output, I guess. Like, is that going to do it? Yeah, there we go, right? And now we can clean this up. Like, we can do whatever we want, send it to another program. The choice is yours. So yeah, that's how that works there. But yeah, let's go now fill in the details here, right? How did we get to the point where all these variables actually have values to generate this report in the end? And just going back to like abstractions, right? I kind of like having this generate report being in its own function. It just prints this out, returns nothing, and we just call it here. Technically, I could have just pasted all of this in here and it would have been the same, maybe even less lines of code. But I feel like this just, I don't know, it just feels better to look at this code later to know that things are separated in their own little like areas. So as for getting all of these variables filled out, let's start from the top here. So not only, do we parse the arguments, but we also get like the length of the list here for the omit authors, right? And that's going to be our omit authors count. That's one of the variables here. That's an easy one. Done. Now, the next function here, you need to get basically all the authors. And that starts with getting the common authors from a specific video ID and maybe possibly use verbose mode or not. And that's also requires getting our API key. So let me just start with that, right? So how do we even get that API key into the script? And for that, there is this function up here, right? Get API key. It is using built-in Python stuff here, like OS, environ, and then the specific environment variable that you want to get. Now, I know there is another function here that you can call, like get env, and then you can paste it in. But what I like doing about this one is, like, this is going to throw a hard error if the key doesn't exist. So then we're basically just trying to get that value. And if it doesn't work, then, we do a try except on this key error. That's a specific error that that'll happen if it's not set. And then we can just, output another F string. Well, not an F string, a multi-line string here that just says the instructions here, which is sort of convenient, I think, right? It just means the user doesn't need to go to the docs and check out how to actually get their key. They can just look straight away and see it here. We saw that before. When I first ran it here and didn't have that exported. Cool. So that gets us our key. So next up, and by the way, when you're dealing with argparse, if you want to grab out specific values that were passed in, like the video ID, or if verbose mode was set, and where's the other one, like omit authors over here, you just do args and then dot, and then the name of the thing that you have. Like, for example, video ID is just like literally video underscore ID. And for omit authors, this one happens to be a hyphen because, flags tend to look a little bit nicer with hyphens. You can still just replace the hyphen with an underscore here, and that's going to give you the value. So that's how we get the information, the input from the user, right, from argparse into these variables that we can access. So get comment authors, let's take a look here at this function here. This takes in the API key, video ID, and if we're, using verbose mode or not. So let's start by having an empty list of authors, right? Right now, there are none. And an author basically is just a common author, right? It's someone who commented on the video. And we're only going to be dealing with one page for now. And these API parameters here, these are taken from Google's documentation for YouTube's API for the specific URL endpoint that we are accessing, which, by the way, spoiler alert, is going to be like YouTube v3 comment threads or whatever. So we'll get to this function in a second here. But yeah, the API parameters, like 1, we need to pass in the API key. 2, this thing part called snippet. Not a super expert on this one. I just looked at the docs, grabbed an example, I ran with it. I don't even know technically what the word snippet means in this context. I mean, it's stuff. And then we have video ID, and then the max result is like the page size. So we didn't go over this, but if I change that to 10 and I rerun this here, let me kill out the verbose flag there. It's gonna page through all this stuff or not. Okay, what happened there? I see what happened. So I went in and I used the installed version of the script. Notice how there's no // in front of this, whereas the code I just modified here, this code exists like in my home directory, source, GitHub, blah, 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 blah. Like, it's using the wrong script. So let me just put a / in here to use the script from this directory. And here we go. So now we can see that we have different pages of results, right? Page 1, 2, 3, all the way until the end. And let me just rerun that with verbose mode so we can see a little bit more output there. And there we go, right? So if I scroll back up to the top here, for page 1, this is the first set of results, and then it's going to go all the way down until, the end. And the reason why I have getting comments for page 6, 7, 8, in this output, even when verbose mode is not set, like what we saw over here, is because, like, imagine if you had a really popular YouTube channel and you had something like, like 4,500 comments, right? If you ran this script with that many comments, it's not going to finish in like, half a second or however long it took for me for like, 85 comments or whatever. So I wanted to always make sure that you as a user of the script know that there's some activity happening. So every time a page is finished, like an API call is finished, then it just outputs the page number there. That's why I have it set up like that. But I'm going to bring this back to 100 now, because using the highest page size that we can, which is 100 with YouTube's API, is a good idea because it limits the number of API calls that you need to make, because every single page is a specific API call. And we'll get to like rate limiting and limits and quotas and stuff in a bit, but let's finish out this function first. So once we have all the parameters set up, then we actually run this other function here called get comments. And if we go there, and let me jump to where this is, like this is the actual function here that we're going to look at. This takes in that parameter list or dictionary, right, of all the things that we need to send over to YouTube's API. Then the API endpoint is this, like this is straight from YouTube's documentation, or their YouTube API's documentation. Then we need to run URL encode on those parameters that we sent in as a dictionary, because, and remember, or by the way, I don't know if you know this, but URL encode is right from Python standard library. It's just a urllib.parse module or function in that module. And we're just using that there to convert a dictionary, like what we see here, of all these parameters into what you would expect, like in a URL, right? So we would have like key equals, and then ABC 1, 2, 3, and then you'd have ampersand part equals like blah, 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 blah. Like it just converts a dictionary of parameters into a URL encoded query strings that you would expect. And you can see here too, like an URL open. Well, before we get to that, like this actually takes, like it concatenates the URL endpoint, right? The API endpoint with the question mark, and then all of our parameters as a query string, right? Cool. And then we are using URL open. And if I jump back up to here, that is another thing that just comes part of Python standard library. It's in the request module for urllib. And this is actually quite nice. Like, man, the syntax is so sweet. All we have to do is use with and then use URL open, pop in the URL that we want to send a GET request to, and that's going to return a response. And then we can just do what we want with the response. In this case, I'm doing a JSON load. Again, JSON module comes with Python. Now, there's a lot of choices here, right? Especially when it comes to making web requests with Python. The requests library has like 40,000 stars on GitHub. It's an amazing library. I use it all the time. If I had a bigger project that had any dependencies, then I'd probably be using the request library. But in this case, where I wanted to keep this to be 0 dependencies, I don't mind just using Python standard library for a simple GET request that has a couple of query parameters. Because I'm sure if you've used the request library before, you know that you don't need to worry about calling URL encode on a dictionary of params, because you can just send it into request as the dictionary and it'll do this stuff for you. So that's an awesome library to use. But for me, I just wanted to do 0 dependencies here, and that's why I am just using the standard library. Honestly, the syntax isn't that bad. This is one of those things where if you Google around for how do I do a GET request with Python standard library, and you look at Stack Overflow, you'll find 8 different answers that have 500 upvotes, but some of them are 8 lines of code, and it's really convoluted. This just worked, and this is in Python's documentation. So, reading the docs is a really, really, really good idea. So now that we have the comments here, right, we went and made an API call, we got the response, converted that response here with JSON load, and now we basically have our results. And next up, we have this progress function, and that is going to take in a page count and also return a page count. So let's take a look here at this one. And that is, all the way over here. So this function here, progress, remember it takes the page count. And if the page count is greater than 1, then all I do is I print out an empty string. So if we jump back over here, I just want there to be spaces between all of these just to make it a little bit easier to read. And, as the page count is greater than 1, I print that out. And then we just print out getting comments for page, and then the actual page count, right? F string here, variable, ... because it's showing that it's doing some work, right? That's why I put the ... And then we just return the actual page count that you sent in, and then we just add 1 because that's all we need to do. And that's going to give us a new page count. And then from here, then remember that empty authors list that we have? Well, we just append to it, basically adding an item to this list. And what are we doing? Well, we need to pass in the results that we got from here. And then we also need to pass in, if we're in verbose mode or not. This displays name function is, and maybe I should rewind for a second here, right? This is not going to return just the display names. It's going to return all sorts of like a really big JSON object with like the contents of the comments and all that stuff. But we only care about the display names, basically the author. So let's go and jump to this over here. And this function display names, again, takes in the results, is verbose. We have a list of users here for item in the results items. And this is like, something you can well, maybe it'll be easier actually just to take a look here at the results themselves. So if I do that and rerun this here, don't want to have verbose mode on. This is going to create a ridiculous amount of output, by the way. Then, this, I'm trying to find like maybe one that starts. So yeah, I mean, okay, that was a ridiculous amount of output. Yeah, okay. But you see what I mean, right? It's a big JSON string, and there's not a string right now, it's actually proper dictionary, but yeah, all these objects are in here, and it's our job to basically pick out just the display name, and I'm trying to eyeball this. You know what? Why am I eyeballing it? Isn't it like display name or something like that? No, not display name. What is it called in the API? Well, it's in the code. Author display name. Cool. So if I do a search for author display, that should be enough. There we go, right? We have this author display name. There's like Doc Mallet, and here's another one, Dennis Stillwaters, right? They're all in here. And it's our job to pluck those out. So when we get this JSON result back, then we have basically an array of items. So for item, in items, and then the specific comment is buried away in this thing called snippet, top level comment, and then snippet. So the top level comment itself has a snippet. Again, this is just like terminology from YouTube's API, but that's basically for every comment in here. And then the author is basically just grabbing that author display name from the comment. And if we go back to here, we can see there's other stuff besides the author's display name, right? There's the author's channel ID, and then, yeah, it's just like, there's a ton of data here, basically, and we don't care about any of that except for the display name. And then, finally, when we're inside this loop still, we just append that author to our empty list of authors here. So that's just building up a list of authors, and then if verbose mode's on, if it's true, then we just output the author's name, and we saw that before with the 2 spaces, and we just return that list of authors. Now, if I go back down to here, that modifies this outer authors list here. And finally, our authors list is getting built up with just the display names. And then we have to deal with pagination. When it comes to using YouTube's API, in the results that you get back in that JSON, there is one key called next page token. So locally here, we just save that into a variable, and then we start pretty much like an infinite loop. Well, it's not infinite because there is a break in here, but the idea is, let's keep looping until we have a next, while we have a next page token. So eventually we're going to get to the point where this token is not going to be here in this results. And that's why I'm using get here and not just like square brackets, right? Because in this case, when this token is not here as a key, then next page token is going to be none, and this loop is going to break. But the idea, basically, for every single page of results, we're going to, do very similar to what we did up here, where we get the page count. And then in this case, though, we're going to adjust our API params. So we're taking this dictionary of params that we had previously, and we're just adding a new key to that, which is going to add page token with the value of that page token that we have in the loop here. So basically, we're just making a new API call to YouTube for that specific video with the page token intact. And then we just do get comments with the params, same code that we just looked at before, except now that page token is going to be there, and YouTube is going to know, like, okay, I got to get like results for the second page. And if I go here and rerun this here, and there we go. Well, actually, you know what? I should probably run that with verbose mode on, so we can take a look at the users, right? We can see that they're different. So for the first page of results, here's like my name there, and it goes down, 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 and then you can see Daniel's the first person on page 2, and then chosen, and it keeps going and going and going until eventually it's going to run out of pages because that token, next token key is not going to be there in the response, and then the loop stops, and then we know we're done. So that's kind of how that works. And in this case too, it's like, display name with the results, and we just add it to the authors here. And then, yeah, we just update that next page token to be whatever the next page token is, right? So when we're working on page 1, then this next token is going to get changed for page 2, then the loop is going to go again, then it's going to be page 3, and then again, and it keeps going and going and going. This next page token is available in that JSON output as its own key in there. I guess if I do a search for next page token here in the output, I don't know, it's not going to find it because when I outputted all that JSON before, it was only with one page of results, so we're not going to see it, but it's no big deal. It's just a long token that's generated by YouTube, and they provide it as an API response. So that gives us, let's see, jumping back down here, that gets us to this point, right? Now we have this list of authors, and this list of authors is the entire list of just display names, right? It's not all the other stuff in the JSON output. But what we end up having here is a list of lists. So maybe I should output just so we have something to look at here. Let's see, put some breakers in there. Cool. And then we'll print authors here just so we can see what this looks like. So let me rerun that without verbose mode. And there we go. Here's our output, right? All of our list of users or, common authors, but you can see there's double brackets here, right? Because it's a list of lists. So you can see if we track the first bracket, it's eventually going to end, where is that going to end? Well, okay, it's going to end here because there's only one page of results. So let me actually just go back here and change that to 10 so we have more than one result, because it's going to make way more sense to look at this output when we have that. And there we go, cool. So you can see if we follow this bracket, it just ends here, right? And then if we go to the next one, then, there's a bracket there, it ends to there. So basically every single page of results has its own list, and that's all contained in like a master list, like a big list. So we have a list of lists, and we need to change that a bit. So let me put that back down to 100, jump back down here to get rid of this print. And I guess I had no line there. Okay. So now that we have our authors, we need to flatten that list, right? We need to take a list of lists and turn that into a single list. And then for that, I have a flatten list function here. And I don't know if you know this one, but Python has this chain module, and then there's a function in there called from iterable, and you can pass in, a 2D list, like a list of lists, and it'll just return back. Well, it turns back like a chain object, but you can convert that back to a list. Essentially, this is, from what I understand, like one of the fastest ways to convert a list of lists into a single list, otherwise known as flattening a list. This all uses stuff from the standard library. You don't need to use like list comprehenses or anything complicated. And then what we get here in the end is just a single list back with a list of authors, and then we can just run like a count on those authors, right? And that's something we pass into the generate report. But just getting a list of lists here isn't enough. So we want to actually sort that list and also make it unique, right? That's the other output that we saw here about, duplicate authors, right? We don't want to have someone who comments twice to have 2 chances of winning. So if we go to the sorted unique list function here, all this does is it converts the list into a set, which automatically is going to make it unique. Like that's just a built-in Python thing. Then we convert that set back to a list, and then we sort it, just using another built-in function from Python. So that gives us our unique sorted list. And then we also get a count of that, right? Because technically, if this removed like 2 people or 1 person or something, the count is going to be different. So we need to explicitly have a different count for that. So now we have our flattened list and it's unique. But, in addition to that, we want to maybe omit some users, right? Omit some authors, omit some folks for whatever reasons. And that's going to take in an argument here for the authors, our current authors that we have, and then the omit authors from the input from params, the argparse params that we passed in. And then we're going to call this function here called remove authors. And remove authors is basically a very simple for on a list, right? So there's our items, right? That's the authors, and the skip items, that is the omit authors. So it's like for author, or for item in skip items, right? If the item, and by the way, we're going to strip it here too, just to make sure that we're not dealing with accidental spaces anywhere. If that is in the original list of authors, then let's just remove that item from the list of the original authors, and then we'll just return that list of authors, right? And I know I have a comment here about like totally could have this done in one line of code using a list comprehension, and this list comprehension, this whole line of code replaces all of this. But I don't know. For whatever reason, list comprehensions just screw with my brain. Like, I understand them when I write them, but then like I won't look at them for a couple of months and I'll come back to the script and then I look at that and it's like, what? okay, like I'll get it, but it's like it takes a lot of effort to get it versus just like, look, loop over the skipped items. If the thing is in the original list, then remove it and we're done. Like there's no way to like misunderstand the logic of this because it's so, I don't know, like bare metal, right? It's like a low level implementation details of like iterating over a list and checking if it's in another list and then removing it if it is. Like in my mind at least, and I know this is totally like very developer specific, it's super dependent, but for me, like this makes so much sense. I can look at that and just parse it mentally, like almost immediately. Whereas the list comprehension, I look at that and like I almost already forgot. Like, yeah, I don't know, but that's totally a preference. I know a lot of people do like using list comprehensions. I try to avoid it when possible, but I'll use them once in a while, like when it really makes sense, you know? But I can't think of a good example right now off the top of my head, and I don't want to waste time on that. But yeah, just know that like if you ever see me writing long form, you know, loops and conditions like that, it's because list comprehensions don't equate to something I can easily parse. But yes, now that we have this final list of authors, you know, the final count there, you know, we just get the length of the new authors here that we've redefined. Then we have duplicate author count, right? Which is the original authors count from up here. And that is going to be minus the unique count, right? And this helps us just remove duplicates, you know, potentially because someone commented 4 times. They only get counted once. Like we want to track that. And that's another thing that we send to the generate report. But this other function here, like the pick winners one, like this is where, I don't know, the magic happens, right? Like how do we decide who actually wins? So to do that, we need to pass in this authors variable here. And then we have the authors final count, right? This is the absolute final count. And then we have the number of winners that we want to pick. And then we call this return winners function, and it actually returns 2 variables, like the actual list of users who won, and then also the explicit winner count. And so let's go and take a look here at the pick winners function. And, you know, authors count, winner count. And this, well, let's start, I guess, with this condition here because it's an interesting one, right? It's like we can't pick more winners than we have in total. So if the winner count that you pass in happens to be more than the actual authors count, like, you know, if you passed in that you want to have 5,000 people win, but there's only like 100 authors, then this condition is going to be true. So then I just say like, well, let's just set the winner count to be the authors count, in which case, like, you know, let's not use the original winner count because that's going to be too high. And we'll just set it to this here, which is the real maximum value of winners you can ever have. And then it uses Python standard library to basically take a random sampling of the list of users, where all we have to do is pass in the list of users, and then we can just pass in a specific count, like 10 or something like that. And random.sample is going to return like n number of authors from that list randomly. So in this case, it's going to return like 10 users. And if we go here, you know, this is what we see over here. What the heck happened here? Did I screw up something? Line 177. So we're going to real-time debug this. What the heck did I do? So let me jump to 177. Oh, okay. Well, apparently that's probably not good to have in here. How the hell did that happen? I guess I just accidentally pasted something. Well, whoa, that must have happened here quite some time ago. I think that brings us back to a normal state of that. Let me get rid of this. And now let's rerun it. Okay, there we go. There's probably some other change I need to remove too, but I definitely didn't catch that when I was doing this. But yes, we can see here, right, 10 winners. There is our list of winners. So going back to this pick winners over here, like, yeah, there we go, right? But we don't just want to return back the list of winners, right? We also want to return that new modified winner count, because this winner count technically could have been modified by this condition. So that's why this returns 2 different things. And I just return them in a tuple here. And if I go back down to here, then it's like, well, now we have the winners as the first thing that we're returning and the winner count as the second thing. And ultimately that gets passed into generate report here, where we have the winners, the winner count, and then all the variables that we just went over before, like various counts for the authors, duplicates, omissions, and then the final count. And as we saw before here, that just takes all of this stuff here and it returns it all in a print statement. And then finally, we get all the output here that we see. And now it is basically done. But I am going to do a get status here to see, like, did I accidentally change something? No, cool. So totally. What's in the file right now is what is up on GitHub. And again, this script may change in the future, could add some interesting things as new use cases come up. But yeah, that's basically this whole script in a nutshell. 200 lines of Python code. I'm sure this video is ridiculous already. Yeah, 50 freaking minutes long. But if you're watching it, thanks a lot for watching. And if you appreciate the video, like it, give it a thumbs up. If you have any questions about this code, by the way, feel free to drop in any comments below, and I'll do my best to answer all of them. All the code is up here on GitHub, so it is free, MIT license. Use it for whatever you like. If you have any issues, like if you find something broken or you want to improve it, then you can always just drop an issue here, open a pull request, and yeah, that'll be it for this one. Thanks a lot for watching, and I will see you in the next video.